that said, we welcome our fifth speaker today, Swapnesh Gandhi from Twitter, and he's going to talk about analytics over terabytes of data with Druid. Swapnesh is a senior software engineer at Twitter, and he focuses on large-scale data and analytics and real-time streaming applications. Previously, he focused on solving big data and streaming problems at startup companies. So I will hand it over to you, Swapnesh.
Thank you, Rachel. So, hi everyone, my name is Swapnesh. Today we're going to talk about how we use Druid at Twitter. So first of all, I'd like to thank my team. So the success story that I'm sharing here is really our team's success story. And with that, let's get into it. So for our presentation today, I'm going to talk about a bit about our background, a little bit of context about what MoPub analytics is, then look into our infrastructure and some best practices. So MoPub is a real-time ad exchange for mobile publishers. It's a monetization platform. So you can think of it as like gaming apps, or these publishers, they want to make money from showing ads to their users. And that's where MoPub comes in. We have over 40,000 publishers, more than 200 bidders, and the scale is really huge. Something like 2 million QPS on our kind of backend systems. In terms of data, we have about 200 terabytes of data that we process every day. When it's aggregated into Druid, it's about 1.7 terabytes a day. And all of our data in Druid is about 700 terabytes. So MoPub analytics. About a couple of years ago, we made a conscious decision to kind of move all of our data into Druid and this platform. So previously, we used meta markets to kind of serve this purpose. So in the past, we had basically what we used to do is kind of send all of our auctions and bids and all those kinds of logs to a third-party company, and they would present it to our users. Our users are, like I mentioned, publishers, bidders, and our commercial teams. So a couple of things happened. Meta Markets got acquired, and we weren't sure that we were going to get kind of quality support that we expect. And the other reason was to kind of build this platform is we wanted to get more security, privacy. You can understand the concerns with kind of sending over this kind of data across the internet. And so the other advantage with kind of building our own system was that we have more control of our data. We know which users are logging in every day. We know what kind of data queries they're running and kind of optimize for those situations and so on. We looked at a couple of solutions. So we looked at Google BigQuery, and we realized that it wasn't going to fulfill our purposes because the latency was like in minutes. And what we really needed was an interactive solution where people can kind of slice and dice across dimensions and try to find answers to their queries in real time. So we already knew that Meta Markets uses Druid, and so we were confident that Druid is going to be a good solution for us. Other thing I want to mention is that this platform is really significant to our business. All of our customers and our commercial teams use this product every day to answer really important questions about our business, to optimize revenue and so on. The other thing is, this is the first production cluster at Twitter. Previously, there were some teams that were doing kind of ad hoc use cases on Druid. And our kind of, this project was such a success that we are helping like wider adoption within Twitter with this. So more and more teams are now starting to use Druid here. So going into our infrastructure a bit. So you can see here that we use So these are just standard components within Druid. We use MySQL as our lookup and metadata store. We use Hadoop for deep storage. And we also have a visualization on top of Druid, which is Imply's product called Pivot. So all of this data, all of these nodes are in Apache Mesos. This is an on-prem data center. And we have about 700 historicals in dedicated Mesos. So the rest of the components such as brokers, coordinator, routers are in shared Mesos. The reason for using dedicated Mesos is that when the cluster restarts or like the historicals are restarting, Mesos would try to kind of schedule them on the same host so that they don't have to kind of pull in all the data every time they restart. So getting more deeper into it, we host about 13 months of data in our cluster. This is to support year-over-year queries. We have 4 tiers, 2 fast tiers and 2 slow tiers. So fast tier has a replica, and we store most recent 2 weeks of data in the fast tier. And in this case, we have 1-to-1 SSD to RAM ratio to achieve low latency. For the slow tiers, we have 5-to-1 ratio, and that's all the data that's beyond 2 weeks. The other thing I do want to mention is we, in the past, in fact, we had a much larger cluster, maybe about like 1,200 nodes or something in terms of the historicals. And we decided to kind of get bigger nodes and reduced overall size of our cluster in terms of the cluster size. In one of the teams within Twitter here actually has a cluster which is 6,000 nodes, but their overall capacity of storage is still lower than us. So Druid can kind of scale to different kind of cluster, different kinds of node sizes. In our case, we definitely prefer kind of larger nodes and overall cluster size getting reduced because it's just easier to manage from infrastructure standpoint. So with that, we're going to get into a few kind of best practices and things we learned. So lookups, we mostly rely on or use query time lookups. The reason being that if, let's say for some reason, some part of your data changes, all the changes reflect immediately with a query time lookup. But if you were to kind of ingest this data into Druid, you will see like certain dimensions changing over time, and that's not the kind of use case we want. So what kind of data we store in lookups? We have essentially just an ID to name mapping. So think of it as like a company ID to company name, or like line item ID to line item name, and so on. And all of these lookups are really many to one mapping. So due to this, we have to store all of the data in historicals and not in the brokers. And also we store it on heap because, again, for low latency. 4 of our larger lookups are about 8 million rows and gigabytes of data. So when we loaded these lookups into our Druid cluster, we faced a lot of issues. So one of them was that, so every day these lookups get reloaded to kind of reflect newer changes. And during these reloads, our cluster was basically inaccessible because of the GC issues that we were seeing. And we finally found some solutions after trying a lot. One of them was using a Jeevan garbage collector. And the other one was that we only load incrementally new changes to our lookups. So this was, in fact, we trying to make this an open source contribution. And I think our pull request is pretty close to merging. So the idea is that instead of loading the whole thing every day, we just load entries that are changed in MySQL based on last modified time. And with these two solutions, our lookups problems were solved and we were in a much better shape. So coming to monitoring, we use a couple of things in monitoring. So the first is internal monitoring and alerting system. Uh, works like pretty similar to like what an monitoring system usually that you'd find or that you may already use looks like. It's great for finding issues. We keep track of simple metrics like CPU, memory, GC, latency, and so on. This is not good for finding exact cause for an issue, and we'll get into like how we actually do that. And also, it's quite important to keep evolving your system, keep evolving what you're watching for, keep like looking for new things that you need to alert and monitor on, because this was something we learned with experience, that there were kind of lots of potential issues that you may actually not be able to find if you don't keep looking for those. And on how we do that, I want to present about Imply Clarity. So Imply Clarity is a smaller Druid cluster that we use for monitoring our production Druid cluster. So the Druid cluster size is going to look like somewhere around maybe even just 5 to 10 nodes. You can actually tweak around how much data you want to send to Clarity from your production cluster, like you can sample and so on. And you index this data into Druid. And I think you may already know that Druid is really good at interactive queries, right? So what we see here is just an example of running some simple queries on the kind of data we have. We can see average query time, 98th percentile query time, and so on. This is on broker queries. So you can also look at historical queries, the queries that are running on historical nodes. You can look at the kind of wait time you have. Yeah, you can look at what kind of queries are failing, how much data is historicals, are historicals returning to brokers, and so on. So it's really helpful to kind of look at overall kind of state of your cluster. It also, you can also look at like the kind of exceptions that are happening in your Druid cluster. A lot of the kind of, I would say, in some cases, severe issues, but also difficult to find issues we found because of Clarity. So I really feel that without Clarity, we'll be basically blind to our cluster and not be able to understand a lot of things. We can also look at the users and who is running what kind of queries. We can look at the usage of our platform. So we can see the kinds of dimensions and metrics that are being queried more often. From this, you can also derive information such like you can just decide to remove certain dimensions and so on, or optimize for certain use cases more. Last but definitely not the least, you can tune configs with Clarity too. So you can all this kind of information that you have, like I mentioned about the amount of data that historicals are running to returning to brokers and so on. It helps you a lot to understand like what kind of configs or config values do you want to set. Druid can be like is flexible and you can kind of run it in multiple ways. So to find that sweet spot, I think I find Clarity really valuable. So tiering, I think it's really important to think in terms of use cases. Our use cases are, we want to serve the latest 14 days of data really fast. So that's why we have a fast tier and the rest goes into slow tier. And tiering can be thought of as like isolation or shared resources problem. So for example, like if you have, let's say 5 data sources and you decide to have tiers for all of them, the advantage you get is that your historical CPU will not be shared among these tiers. And the other side is that if some of the kind of data sources are not being queried as often, then you're not utilizing your resources. So we, in fact, in the past had kind of divided up our cluster into multiple tiers based on data sources. And then we later kind of ran some A/B tests and realized that we do not actually gain enough performance improvement by just isolating. And we ended up kind of consolidating our tiers into just fast and slow tiers. And that saved us 20% on infra cost because we were just kind of doing this isolation without getting a good benefit out of it. Experimenting. So we run performance tests on all kinds of like major and even minor changes we make to Druid, such as upgrades, such as config changes, and so on. And I definitely recommend that your performance test should be really kind of use cases that you want to serve with your cluster most of the times. And the second part is running A/B tests in your cluster. So with Druid, it can sometimes get a bit difficult to find out like what is the exact config that I want to tweak so that I get this performance out of it. And it's possible, but it's quite difficult, I think, without running A/B tests. So the way we run A/B tests is we, let's say I can take my example of the lookups that I spoke about earlier. So at the time we were trying to kind of optimize on JVM heap, also the type of garbage collector we use, and so on. And so I ran, you already have, like most of us have a test cluster, but it doesn't really is at the scale of production cluster. So it's not really kind of effective way of finding the right config. So I ran a couple of brokers in our production cluster that were receiving production traffic, and we could actually see like the changes that we are making are working or not working. One of the issues that we faced, I would say 3 or 4 months ago, was that we were seeing our coordinator kind of do this, which is it was in a chaotic state. It was showing up a lot of basically it's trying to drop and kind of read a lot of segments, and it can't do that. And the solution, we couldn't find a solution, couldn't find much in the log. We were just restarting the coordinator and the issue would go away. And finally we kind of stumble upon this config called load queue, where the default is curator, which is single threaded kind of load queue, and the HTTP, which is multi-threaded, is something that is more kind of suited to large scale clusters. Finally, coming to security retention, we have enabled mutual TLS on our Druid cluster. So every Druid process that's talking to another Druid process is validating that it's talking to the right Druid process, and then it'll actually do the communication. Retention wise, we strip certain dimensions after 30 days. So what we do is we reindex and remove certain dimensions from our index config to just drop dimensions after 30 days. The idea being, again, we remove certain high cardinality dimensions, certain dimension that we don't find much use for after 30 days, and so on. This also helps us in saving costs a lot. I can actually give you a number. So I think our full dimensions data, which is anything before, anything most recent 30 days, is almost same size as our rest of the 12-month data. So you can kind of understand that we save a lot on costs by just stripping certain dimensions we don't need. Finally, for retention, we use Druid kill tasks. So this, I definitely recommend everyone to use that. It cleans up like Druid segments from the coordinator, as well as delete it from the deep storage. And in fact, in the past, we did not have these kill tasks enabled for the retention, and we had a pretty manual process for kind of deleting data from deep storage, and had kind of an incident where we deleted a lot of our deep storage data. We got lucky because we just downloaded that data from Druid back to the deep storage, but I really recommend having deep storage backups so that you don't have to go through this. Yeah, so these are kind of all the best practices that I wanted to talk about. Uh, thank you. I think we
Fantastic.
have some time for questions.
Yeah, we do. Thank you so much for that, Swap. This was really, really interesting. We've got some lots of questions, 15 already. If you do have any others, please put them in the Q&A chat at the bottom here, the Q&A panel. A couple of questions had some questions about lookups. So are you seeing any performance issues, or are you tiering your lookups?
Yeah. Performance issues. Yeah, so like I mentioned, we did try a few combinations, and we just stuck to kind of having on-heap lookups. So basically have everything on heap. And with respect to like tiering, we do tier them. Yeah, definitely. Again, this is kind of like being able to pick and choose where you want to kind of load large lookups. So for example, we don't want to, if there is a large lookup that I'm going to kind of add to the cluster now, I don't want to add it to all of our kind of tiers and cause kind of chaos, right, in the cluster if that's the worst case. So we have kind of canary tiers, which is like you load it on certain nodes first. Also, we had tiers for each of the kind of historical tiers. We have tiers for brokers as well, and we definitely use them.
Do you guys have any plans on using the new join features?
Yeah, so definitely, I think I haven't had chance to look into it a lot, but I'm definitely something I'll be open to and would like to look into.
Okay, wow, there's lots of good questions in here. Oh, so somebody had asked why wasn't your coordinator configured for high availability?
Yeah, so this is something just we just didn't get to and didn't do, but we do. I think we did try that, and we do use it, I think, now. So that was before, but yeah, that's definitely something that we do. It's a good idea to do.
Awesome. And so people had some questions about ingestion. Is it batch or real time? And how many middle managers do you have?
Yeah, so currently we have mostly batch ingestion. We don't have a lot of middle managers right now. I think it's about 20 or something. We did try real-time ingestion as well. In fact, that was a project that I worked around last quarter. So we in that case, because our scale is really large, we had like about I think it was like 300 to 400 million managers when we had real-time streaming like running, and we faced some issues like the coordinator issue that I spoke about, and the overall overload as well, where we didn't have a kind of highly available overload. So we kind of had to pull back that real-time streaming work, but we are going to work on it in a couple of months again. I think a lot of the issues that we had were with scaling the overload and so on, and some of them were actually self-inflicted, where the way we kind of do our ingestion was getting affected. And I think we have a kind of good idea now that that we should be able to scale it again for real-time streaming as well.
Awesome. Okay. Do you run everything in one data center, or do the replica tiers run in different locations?
Yeah, good question. We currently run it in single data center, but we do plan to kind of have essentially for like having a cross TC kind of cluster. I think our plan is to have two different Druid clusters rather than having replicas in different data centers, just because of the latency issues and so on. And I think it's a bit difficult to kind of depending on how you do it, but it can be a bit difficult to kind of be able to reference like your Druid cluster in a single DC from a different DC and so on. So we probably will just like replicate and create a new smaller Druid cluster for our different DC.
What type of visualization tools are you guys using?
Yeah, so we are using Imply's pivot. So we use Imply for our Druid support as well. And also we use pivot, which is their visualization tool.
Oh. So there's a lot of questions about this these stripping dimensions. So
Right.
how many dimensions do you have in the last 30 days? How many are you stripping after? Are you storing the dimensions in lookups, or your dimensions included in your data source? Can you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, so I don't have the exact numbers, but I think it's roughly like, let's say our full dimensions, like all of our dimensions are about, just let's talk about a single data source, about 100. And then when we strip it out, I think it's probably something like 20 to 30. Yeah, and like I mentioned before, the idea is to again kind of re-index into Druid after 30 days so as to remove these dimensions and bring your data size down. And this is also based on, we know that these dimensions are high cardinality, and it's going to help to bring them down or remove them, as well as kind of looking at usage patterns and finding out which ones we can draw.
And people want to know, for the batch ingestions, are you using Hadoop or native indexer?
We're using Hadoop.
Hadoop, okay.
Because that's the way we started. And I know that there have been a lot of great kind of features that Druid added, but we haven't had a chance to kind of use them yet.
Wow, 3 questions about compaction all at the end. Are you guys using compaction? And if you are, what's your experience with it?
Yeah, so since we use like batch and we use Hadoop, we do not need to do compaction. Our kind of segments are already appropriate sizes. But for real time, we do. So when we are working on real time, it's something that we'll definitely be looking at. I don't have much more info on it yet, but I think, yeah, definitely something we'll need for real time.
For sure. What version, and people keep asking what version of Druid you're currently using. You did have a snapshot of the older console, so.
Yeah, I think we are on Druid 0.15, if I'm not wrong. And for some reason, I just like the older console. We do have the latest kind of console as well, but I just like the kind of the overall view that it gives. Like you can look at your overall cluster size and so on. So that's just my personal preference.
Okay. Do you have any SLAs for the hot or fast tier, and how do you guarantee it? And so what's your average response times, etc. with that?
Yeah, so I think we do have SLAs. I think it depends on the query type, right? Like the kind of data you're querying, the amount of dimensions, the time frame, and so on. For the fast tier, which is the latest, the idea is that it should be within, let's say, 10 seconds and so on. And how we enforce it is like, it's basically just built into our design, the way we kind of architected our tiers and so on. For the slower tiers, I think our SLAs are a bit maybe lenient, about 30 seconds. Yeah.
Ooh. Does Imply Pivot satisfy all the slicing and dicing needs of your end users?
Yeah, it definitely does. Yeah.
All right. Yeah, I think we're over time. Let me take a look at theirs. Yeah, we've got about 17 open questions now, so I apologize to everybody for not getting to them, but we are in the process of gathering all these Q&A questions to answer in a blog post. So, prepare yourselves for a follow-up blog post or a direct email with your question being answered. It is really important to us that we get all these done. So out of Wow, 38 questions. You got 21 answered, so great. Well, thank you very much. We really appreciate the time and the presentation. It was extremely interesting. It generated a lot of really good questions. So anyway, thank you very much, Swapnesh. So we will be sending out a link to the slides in the recording. For all those out there in Druid land, we'd love to hear your story too. So if you have any other questions or you want to find out how you can talk more about your Druid experience, please reach out to us at community@imply.io.